Crystal Wilkinson is the award-winning author of Perfect Black, The Birds of Opulence, Water Street, Blackberries, Blackberries. She is the recipient of an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Poetry, an O. Henry Prize, a USA Artist Fellowship, and an Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. She currently teaches at the University of Kentucky in the Creative Writing MFA program. Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghost is her latest book. Everyone, please welcome Crystal Wilkinson. Aimee Nezhukumatathil is the author of the New York Times bestselling illustrated collection of nature essays, World of Wonders, in praise of fireflies, whale sharks, and other astonishments, which was chosen as Barnes & Noble's Book of the Year and named a finalist for the Kirkus Prize. She also wrote 4 previous collections, Oceanic, Lucky Fish, At the Drive-In Volcano, and Miracle Fruit. She is a professor of English and creative writing in the University of Mississippi's MFA program, where she received the faculty's Distinguished Research and Creative Achievement Award. Bite by Bite, Nourishment and Jamborees is her latest book. Everyone, please welcome Aimee Nezhukumatathil. Okay, so I always want to start, because we're real humans and this is real life, with a mindful, actual, how are you right now?
That's so lovely. I don't think I've ever been in 20-something years. Nobody's ever actually asked, like, how are you? Today, I'm good. I'm a little sad. I'm missing, I have a senior in high school, and so those of you who have kids or been around kids, I'm just, it's a little bit like up and down, up and down.
Yes.
But today is a good day. I'm a little sad. I'm missing his, he's captain of the cross-country team, and I'm missing his meet right now. But it's also good because I get to be away surrounded by books and people who love books as well. So,
I feel that.
Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah, Crystal.
I'm good. The world is crazy. The world is, I'm not going to cuss today, but the world is crazy.
Please cuss.
And I'm hungry. But I'm good. I'm good. And I'm very, very grateful.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I attend with all the world's ills, is to stand in gratitude. So I'm very grateful, and grateful for you all for being here. And grateful to you, Cree. And you, Aimee.
Thank you. Could you all give us the elevator pitches of your books, just so everyone, we can ground the conversation?
Sure. So the elevator pitch, and for those of you who don't know, the elevator pitch is how do you describe your book in like 30 seconds or less? So I'll do it really, really quick. It's a collection of about 40 very, very short meditations on various foods. These are not necessarily my favorite, but foods that kind of conjure up a direct memory for me. So you've got things like mangoes, but also lumpia, which is my favorite kind of like crunchy fried food from the Philippines, and something like leche flan. And they're all illustrated by this incredible Japanese-American illustrator named Fumi Nakamura. And I'm not a chef, and I'm not a cook, but I love to eat, and I love my family. So that's how it goes. Yeah.
40 seconds. I'm from Kentucky, so I can't do nothing in 40 seconds. But I mean, my book, like the first thing that I always want to say about it, that I've always said about it, is that I wanted it, when I wrote it, I imagined it going from the nightstand to the kitchen. And so I always have this fight about, is it a cookbook? I know so many chefs and know people who really cook, so I always say no. I consider it a culinary memoir with recipes, not a cookbook, although there are recipes in there and you can cook from them. But there are lots and lots of words and lots of stories about my family, covering several generations, going back to my third great-grandmother, Aggie, who was enslaved in Virginia and brought from Virginia to Kentucky as a child. And so it sort of begins and swirls around her and my grandmother and comes up through the generations and even into the future. So the concept, the African concept of Sankofa and how it deals with food, how we're always reaching back for food, is the primary concept in the book.
You both have written numerous things. Why was it these books right now? What do you have a plan, like you're ticking off, or it's like something conjures up inside of you, like it's time to create this?
Well, I'm a poet at heart, so there is no plan, at least for this poet. There is no, I'm just happy, I know what's going on today and tomorrow, and that's how I take my life. Although I'm a Capricorn, so I'm kind of lying because I always have a master plan, but day to day. I will say, and I think maybe this is one thing that Crystal and I have in common in terms of the origins of this book, and and absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, Crystal, but because we were at a conference right when we were writing the essays for this book, and when we realized, we have some overlaps, of course, because I'm such a fangirl of Crystal, I was thinking, maybe one day if I ever get my stuff together, we could appear together. So this is actually just such
Capricorn
fun
master plan.
Yeah, there you go. It's a great kind of full circle moment, because when we last were in person, Crystal, I think I had maybe 5 essays, and now I have, and I wrote 80, and then I whittled it down to 40. So I guess I would just say the thing that was similar is that it was born of the pandemic. There in a time when we were so isolated, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to write, but what I was writing was all the times that I was together with chosen family, with blood family, with the man who would eventually be my husband, with my children. All I wanted to do was, because at the time, honestly, this was, we're thinking about August 2020. I don't know about you all, but I was still wearing masks to go outside. We were still wiping down groceries. So that was a moment when all I wanted to do, I did not want to write about despair and darkness. All I wanted to do was remember when we could have a cookout together, or a dinner party. Remember that? It felt so far away at that moment. And honestly, without being melodramatic, I didn't know if we would be able to have that again at that moment. Again, remember what your mind was, August 2020. It seemed so far away from when I could, and I get choked up thinking about it. I have my parents are elderly in Florida. They were, I was in Mississippi. Time was ticking, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to sit at a table with my mother again. So, and now, and she's fine. Both my parents are fine. But in August 2020, it was all I could do to just sit at the desk and write about all the good times and stuff. Yeah. Sorry, I'm such a dork.
I will also cry. Don't do that.
Yeah, I also think of that time fondly, because we were both in the same place, and we were there as poet and fiction writer at that conference we couldn't remember where, somewhere in North Carolina. Yeah. And it was the first time we'd met, and we were on a panel where the people who were putting the conference on, as teachers in the conference, we were supposed to say what we were working on. And I remember being so surprised, and I think you were surprised too. It's like, I'm writing a book about food, and we both went, me too. And food, of course, I think is the great conduit, right? I think that food, we all have to have it, but I also think that breaking bread with somebody gives you an avenue into emotion, into their past lives, into their ancestral memory in ways that doing other things doesn't. And this book, for me, started with an essay. And I'd written an essay called Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghost, where I just paid homage to my ancestors. And I thought, okay, it's a lyric essay. Okay, I'm done. And I think they reposted it around the holidays, and a lot of people read it. And one of those people was Ronnie Lundy, who's one of the foremost writers of Appalachian foodways, and a friend. And Ronnie said, would you want to write a book based on that essay? And I said, no, I would not. And she said, well, what are you working on? I said, I'm working on a novel. It has a hole in it, but I'm working on this novel. I don't want to write a book about food. That's not my lane. Like, I'm not writing a book about food. And so she said, okay, and she went away. And if anybody knows Ronnie, she did not stay away. She kept on. And then she had someone call me who's a food agent, and I didn't even know there was such a thing. I was like, what is happening here? And I sort of, I can't say I didn't work hard on it, but I sort of accidentally, in a way, ended up with this book because it was the pandemic. And when I talked to the food agent, she said, why don't you try writing a proposal? And so I would write a proposal, and she said, this sounds like a proposal for a novel. And I said,
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
well, yeah, that's what I do. I said didn't want to do this. And so she said, well, try again. And I had said to myself, I'm going to try this one more time. But I was enjoying the process of writing the proposal because, again, pandemic, flour shortages. As I was outlining each chapter, I got further and further away from being a vegetarian because I was thinking back to my childhood, and I was writing about things like souse. And I mean, probably hadn't eaten pork in I don't know how long. I was thinking about souse and hog killing time, and my grandmother making cracklings. And so I was masking up and driving all over Kentucky trying to find souse, and people were delivering 60-pound bags of flour to my porch, and and I was cooking and writing, and that's kind of how the book came about. Like we were in these bubbles, and I had a book auction in my little room with my husband, like, and his best friend cussing on the phone, like doing the dozens over a chess game. I'm like, what are y'all doing? I'm trying to do business in here. In this room on this Zoom, and I was just trying to okay, I can't run out of the room, but he was like, yeah, I'm gonna kick your butt, and and I was like, what are y'all doing? But that's kind of how it came about, and it was a great, I know one of the things you wanted to talk about was the emotions behind it, but I did not think about that this book would be one of the through lines would be grief. I thought I was remembering my grandmother. I was remembering my great-grandmother. I was trying to have this relationship with ancestors that I had never met with food being, again, the conduit, or food being the filter and the lens. And I found myself really, and again, it was the pandemic, so it was that kind of thing. I was cooking and I was crying. I was cooking and I was grieving. I was cooking and I was remembering. And poured all of that into the book as I was writing it.
My favorite part of that story is you saying food writing wasn't your lane. That's my favorite. That's hilarious. Aimee, I'm glad that you mentioned that you had 80 essays that you pared down, because you literally went from lychee to shave ice in the book. And so I'm really curious, how did you decide which foods to center and to publish?
Yeah, so it's kind of impossible it's an interesting exercise for you all to do. Can you even list your 20 favorite foods of all time? Can you list your 40? Can you list
it with the quickness in the back?
I know, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Because, I think anybody can. I think it would change almost on the daily or on the hour. And that's what I was doing. Originally, this was going to be Aimee's favorite foods around the world.
Yeah.
And then, I'd be brushing my teeth later. I'd be like, oh, what about this? Or, oh, I got to say this for my grandmother. Or, I got to say my husband's favorite dish, too, in there or something like that. And it would change not just even on the hour, but on the week and the month. And it was constantly changing table of content. So instead of doing that, I was like, what are the stories I want to tell? And so I wanted to include some from childhood, from high school, the tumultuous middle school years, which for me as a child in the 70s and 80s, I was kind of done, and it's no shade to other books at all, but I was kind of done with the Asian American trope of I brought a weird lunch and it was sushi, but my white friends didn't like it or something, because also I was just done with that trope of being worried what other people said. So I want the subtitle of my book is Jamborees, so, I wanted to showcase the times where I was in glee over food with my loved ones and not ashamed. Or if I was moments of being ashamed or nervous, I'm reclaiming that now, that kind of thing, and not staying small, not apologizing that I know, 20 different varieties of mangoes, and making myself small instead of saying to the idiot that I was dating at the time, like, how do you not know 20 varieties of mangoes?
That's an important question.
Yeah, exactly. That should have been a red flag already. That he, but so it was. So instead of making a list that I know would be changing in the table of contents on the hour or on the day, I made it to be like, what are the stories that I want to share that I haven't necessarily seen before in the pantheon of food writing, which I love. I mean, I'm a poet and a nature writer, really, but I love reading about food, and I love. It's the kind of, I wanted the kind of writing that makes you feel like you have traveled without ever leaving your chair.
Yeah.
And I didn't want it to be, look at me, I've traveled all over. So I made it a point to set stories in Mississippi. I made it a point to set stories in a very rural, part of Western New York that had stars and bars all over the place. Kind of one of my things that I say is, I see more Confederate flags in Western New York, where I used to live for 15 years and where I had my babies, than I ever do in North Mississippi. So I wanted to include that. Because that seems to be a newsflash to people.
Yeah.
And all the while knowing that no place is perfect, no place is home necessarily, but it's kind of what you create and make. And ultimately, the final thing I'll say on that is the word, this is a little nerdy, but the Greek word poet actually doesn't mean like someone who's authentic or super creative with words. The Greek word poet means to make, and it's not making with words, it's just making. So I love that poet in ancient Greece was someone who cooks, someone who does murals, someone who makes songs. That was, all of them were considered poets.
Yeah.
And so with that spirit in mind, I actually had a version of that tacked up on a Post-it. I always had that spirit in mind, because I always had the voice on my shoulder, like, how dare you write about food? Stay in your lane. You're a nature writer. You're a poet. But then you realize, oh, the food that I love is from nature.
Yeah,
So,
hopefully.
So, yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I love a good fast food fry, But mostly the food that I love is actually from ingredients from the earth. And yeah, so I always had that in mind that poets could write about food too, I'm a maker. We all are makers, actually. Yeah. And so somewhere along the lines, and I think it happened in Europe somewhere, but somewhere along the lines it was like, oh, only poets are the upper echelon or this ivory tower. And actually, poets have been from the beginning. People who make stories or make songs, make music, make art, make weavings, make clothes, those are poets.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just kind of put that out there instead of saying like, oh, it's only for the elite. We're all poets here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crystal, at the central premise of your book, it is ancestors guiding you in the kitchen. And I'm really wondering if you could talk us through experiencing an ancestral presence. Is it summoned? Do they come and go as they want? Do you feel like your kitchen is an altar for them? Set the scene.
Good question.
Yeah, I just got chills from that. But I think all of that is true. I mean, I think my first experience with this was, I was raised by my grandmother in a little holler in Indian Creek, Kentucky. And my mother, and this is my next book, my mother had suffered what we call a nervous breakdown. She ended up being diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. And I think part of it was, as a little girl, my mother was gone from the household, and so I was really clinging to my grandmother. So my very first memory of my grandmother is me standing in a chair while she's cooking, trying to look over into the pot. Like I wanted to see the bottom. Now somebody would probably call CPS to get that child away from the stove, but I remember feeling the heat from the stove because I was like looking over. And my grandmother got married when she was 14. And so it was, when she passed, it was the holiday. And I hadn't really thought about then the way that I think about it now. But when she died, she had made 60 holiday meals. 60. And so she died, and here I was, a young adult, trying to figure out, like, well, what are we going to, I'm in the middle of grief. It's the first holiday after she passed. I always helped her cook, so I knew how to cook. But I didn't know how to get through that first holiday meal and cook. And she had 25 grandchildren, 7 kids, and all those significant or insignificant others that went with all those kids. A little bit of shade, but we all got them. We all got them in our family. But we all gathered in that house, and she cooked those meals. And here I was in my house, cooking for my mother and my 3 children. And I didn't know what to do. Like, I knew how to cook the meal, but I'd get started, and I'd break down crying, and I kept going, trying to do it. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. There's not going to be anything cooked because I can't do it. And I remembered that when my mother, my aunts and uncles said, do you want anything? You can't have this, you can't have this, can't have this, but do you want anything else? And I said, I want Granny's dress. And so I went back and I got one of her dresses and I brought it home and I put it up in my closet. And so at that moment when I broke down, I went and got her dress out of the closet and I hung it up on the back door. And when I did that, she had been gone several months at that point. And when I did that, I suddenly, my back got straighter and I suddenly felt like I could do it. Like I felt like her presence was there and I felt like I could hear her saying, okay, girl, come on. You can do this. Don't put too much sage in that dressing. Like, don't oversalt the macaroni. Like, whatever she was telling me, like I felt like that her presence was there. And that she helped me through that first time. And then I think sometimes it's that strong, and then sometimes it's like I'm standing in the kitchen and the light comes through the window, the sunlight comes through the window in a particular way and hits makes a pool on the floor. And I'm thinking about my childhood kitchen and the pool of light on the floor when I was a child. And I think there's a presence there. Mm-hmm. And with Grandma Aggie, who of course I never met, and Grandma Lily, who was my grandmother's mother, who I also never met, it was more of a conjure, using Kelly's term. It was more of a conjuring, like stepping as a craft, stepping into in some ways, I'll say it's 2/3 part spirit and 1/3 part stepping into my craft as a fiction writer, like trying to imagine the lives of these ancestors and having them come forth in a particular way to join me, to guide me.
Yeah.
And I think we all have them. I mean, that's been the thing, like when I was on book tour, and I'm telling my particular Black story, I'm telling my particular Appalachian story, but then to ask someone, who's your kitchen ghost? And they say, oh, my Italian Nonna. My Nonna is my kitchen ghost. Oh, the elderly Black man who lived next door when I was freshly married and didn't know how to cook. And he came over and said, girl, I'm going to show you how to make some collard greens. That's my kitchen ghost. To hear all of these stories from everybody, that everybody has kitchen ghosts and everybody has the ability to conjure their own, in my opinion.
Yes. We need some tissuers because I have to ask questions and be an adult. You guys are making it hard. You both move through life mindfully in the way that I would expect because you're both writers. And I think that writers have a propensity to notice more and be more present. And I think as I was reading you all's writings about food and the details of growing it and preparing it and preserving it or just experiencing it, it really made me think about how slow food is. And but we have to consume it so regularly that it's just like that should just be a part of the cycle. But somehow everything has become so much faster. And especially food. Like food is like, there's literally fast food. So I was wondering what you all think are the consequences of the way that we engage with food in 2024.
whole essay question right there. I know. Like, it's such a beautiful question. I just want to sit and like go to my desk now and write. And my goodness, Cree, it's just such a gorgeous, just such a whip smart question, and it's so thoughtful. I want to give like an equally thoughtful answer, but I guess really what I would say to start off with is there's so much in everybody's life that is that is pushing us to be convenient and quick. And those of you who are makers, which is all of you, writers, there's a hustle to like get this out there, write more, write a new op-ed, or get your book out in front of anything. If you are whatever you're doing in your job, how do you advance? There's just so much fast everything. I am not anti-screen, but and I love social media, but I also know that it is causing all of our attention spans to get less and less, and I feel that so much on myself, and I pride myself on how slow I like to read and how slow I like to do. So I guess what I would say is this is not a prescription or anything like that, but I would say there is a lot we can't control, obviously, in our lives. But one thing that at least I can mostly control, not always, notice, but mostly can control is what goes on in my house or in my kitchen or what goes on in my backyard. And that I feel so empowered because I wasn't always able to say that, you know? I mean, my parents were always a little chaotic, working big, expansive jobs in the medical field, and it was always just chaos through our home. Now I try to, and with having 2 teenage boys, I really just want to be super mindful about, hey, no phones on the table when we're eating. We're not watching, when we sit down to watch football, and we love college football, we're not doing the 4 screens at a time, even if our TV can do that, which I didn't even know until my sons pointed it out. So it's just about being, and I'm also being mindful of raising 2 boys who pass as white, that they are absolutely going to help me in the kitchen and be competent in the kitchen. And thanks to whoever their future partner is going to be, or if they have a future partner, I think it would be just such a failure if they are just like, kitchen is not for me. I can't clean. I can't cook. I can't do anything. So it's a very it's not easy at all. But I love knowing that, okay, my son can make a good meal, and so if anything happens to me or his father, his kitchen is also going to be mindful. His kitchen and who he brings into this kitchen is going to be, it's going to be a gesture of love and things like that. So there's a lot that we can't control, and it's overwhelming. But I feel like it's easy to say, okay, I can control what goes on in my kitchen. I can control what is. What's going on in my backyard, gardens, things like that. And for me, that is, I'm not exactly answering your question, but I would say that when you have at least that little bit of control, like planting a garden, even if you think you don't have that green thumb, you can maybe grow basil or something that you can harvest that right before you make a pasta and add it to your pasta. Watching and nurturing something grow and watching and nurturing something that is born out of mistakes in the garden too is so exhilarating, and it's a good thing rather than something to be afraid of. That's a big answer, I know, but Crystal, how about you?
I'm trying to think I don't think fast anything is good. In fact, most fast things are horrible, right? Like a tomato that someone has come into maturation fast tastes like, I don't know. It's the most untomato thing ever.
Mushy water.
Yeah. It's awful, and we consume a lot of horrible food. I was in D.C. recently, and my new best friend in D.C. was my Uber driver, and I think he got lost intentionally because we were having this whole conversation about food, and he didn't want to be anti-American, but then he would say things like. We were talking, he said, well, tell me about your book. And I was telling him about my book. And he was like, oh, food grown from the garden. Like, he was just got so excited about it because it becomes like not the norm, I think, in our country. So for me, Well, this reminds me too of the nap ministry.
Oh, yeah.
Like we all need to go sit our behinds down. Like we don't know how to do that anymore. Like I find myself like whenever I'm anxious at work, going back to some of the things that Aimee was talking about, like I intentionally stop and try to slow down. And it's the same thing of being mindful when I'm cooking. Cooking is a meditation, or it can be. Of course, it's necessary. We've got to cook, we've got to eat. But like if you do it, if you stop yourself and say, oh, I just got off work, don't have dinner, stop yourself, really put your whole self into it. It's a meditation. You know, one of the most wonderful things is making homemade bread and kneading the bread, whether it comes out right or not. And you know, I've been cooking a long time, since I was probably 10 or 12 years old. Been making bread all this time. I don't have to tell y'all on the other end how old I am now. We won't talk about that. But all these years I've been making bread, and it doesn't always turn out. But the process of making it is part of the experience that grounds me. And I, too, have tried to pass that on to other people. And I think we can find various ways for it to slow down. Like I had a pandemic garden, but I don't have a post-pandemic garden because my time has been ate up. You know, it went from pandemic garden to a deck garden to empty pots this year. Aww. Like there's not anything in any of the pots. But to replace that, I've been mindful to go to, you know, in Kentucky we have something called Black Soil, which is a conglomerate of black farmers, and I make a point to go to them for my food. Even that is a matter of slowing down, because it's much easier to call Instacart or to go to the grocery than to go find them and get their food. So having food that's in the process of being grown slowly, I think is important. And teaching children, like I teach my grandchildren still, like we have these little exercises, like, you know, do you know where these, I don't eat eggs, whole chapter in the book about why I don't eat eggs. We won't talk about that either, but I want my grandchildren to know that eggs just don't appear in a carton.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be mindful when you put something in your mouth, even when you're in a restaurant, like even if you don't ask, like you have to think about, where did this come from? Yeah. Who killed this cow? Who harvested this meat? Who caught this fish? Who picked this vegetable?
My grandmother is from Mississippi. She still lives here in Kosciuszko. And when I was little, I was in her garden, and she picked up a leaf. I should know, but I don't know what it is. And she was like, what is this? And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, people who don't know plants starve. And I was like, okay. So I feel that. Slowing down, yes. Food can also be deeply political, and I think for the most part, you all kept it personal. And I'm curious, what was the decision around, like, I want to put this in the context of bigger, like, Crystal, you're talking about the eggs. The eggs, like, the factory farming of eggs right now is just insanely egregious. And I know you could have went there, but you were like, no, I'm going to tell this story about my relationship with eggs. And I'm curious how you all made those decisions.
I think my book is political. I mean, I think creating a space in which black women from the 1800s can tell their own story is pretty political. I think that my third great grandmother Aggie is a stand-in for the thousands and thousands of black women who were never able to tell their story, and putting her story on her tongue for her to speak for herself and to sort of represent those other people of her time is political in some ways. I guess I started with the personal because and that too is political. You know, people think that black people don't live in Appalachia. So I don't consider myself a historian. I don't consider myself a shelf, but I think, we definitely know that Appalachia has entered the chat in national politics. But I think writing this book,
Yes.
but I think writing this book was also sort of an act of entering the conversation. It becomes part of that national conversation. Like I said, I'm not a historian. I don't consider myself a chef. I've used food as the lens to tell the story of my people, but it enters that conversation, that historical conversation about, people say, well, why do you call yourself, because some Black people who live in Appalachia don't call themselves Appalachian. And if people ask me, why do you call yourself Appalachian? Why is that on the front of everything? And I said, because it's mine. Because it belongs to me and my people as much as it belongs to anyone else. Whether mainstream, the historical record has told you that or not. 200 plus years of living in one particular place. Appalachia is mine. I don't care what the dictionary says. If the dictionary says, if you look in a dictionary that's old enough, it says, if you see the word Appalachian, it says white people indigenous to the Appalachian region. When that dictionary was written, my third great grandpeople were already living in Appalachia. So they were already excised from the conversation. So
I feel you. Okay,
yeah,
no,
writing the personal, but underneath that is all that political stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the question so much, and I think it's because I have what my friends call resting smile face, that they forget that,
You do.
Yeah. I can't help it. So if you see me here, I am happy generally, but I was thinking, like, I was getting mad, but I could feel myself smiling about the dictionary, But I will say too, and it kind of shocks people when I do readings and when I have events, or when I am a visiting writer. I was just at University of Southern Mississippi, and I taught to this incredible crowd, and thank you, University of Southern Mississippi, for being here and supporting the book festival. These first-year honor students, I think they were a little bit like, oh my, oh, and you're like, Smiley Aimee actually has some daggers under her belt. And what I mean by that only is that, I'm not saying anything that can't be fact-checked, and what I mean by that is, some of the chapters in here, I include a chapter on shave ice, which was, it's too long, and there's other historians who have written an entire book. This is just one chapter. But I think oftentimes people are like, oh, fun little snow cone, things like that. Shave ice was originated in Hawaii from people who are indigenous to the land.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this really in a nutshell here. But as a result, because they weren't allowed to have cream to make ice cream, the colonizers took away their cream.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, okay, we still have ice. We're going to do some fun stuff with ice and use our beautiful tropical fruits here in Hawaii. And then the colonizers were like, well, wait, I want some of that too.
Every time.
And and so it's huge. There was waves when Obama chose his favorite shave ice place. There was,
Yeah.
I can't even begin to capture it here from you, but that was a huge moment in Honolulu. I talk about the vanilla spice in particular, and I'm certainly not the first, but all the books I could find written about vanilla were all written by white folks, and the gist of what I found so interesting and so kind of magical and beautiful, and I wanted to bring it to light, but it was also heartbreaking, is the person who, and some of you might know this already, yes, you know this already,
Yeah.
Edmund Albus was this super smart enslaved child who he was the only one who could figure out how to pollinate the vanilla orchid. And the interesting, and again, I'm summing up a little too much here, what was so interesting is that his enslaver magically, or I don't know, it was rare.
Right.
I know. He actually said, I'm going to give you credit. And his best friend, the enslaver's best friend, was a very prominent botanist at the time, and said, like, no, I'm gonna borrow that technique. And soon he was starting to spread rumors that he discovered it. He discovered how to pollinate vanilla. And this man, the enslaver, and now I'm not, absolving him from all of his other terrible duties, but I will give at least this little teeny bit of credit that he put in his will. No matter what my friend, the botanist, blah, 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 says, it is Edmund Albus who discovered the pollination, and he will forever be known as the person who discovered how to pollinate vanilla orchids. And he even created beef by saying, like, my best friend is basically dead to me, because of this. And it destroyed that botanist's career. Again, I'm summing it up, but to give credit that there was a boy who was a gardener, an enslaved gardener, and he had that, at least for a brief moments, had that leisure, I say leisure in quotes, time to notice, if you push the inner parts of an orchid together, they bloom and bloom again and bloom again. I just wanted to write about the joy of it without taking, without ignoring, the kind of terrible, darker origin story of it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to showcase that when you are baking bread or, cookies and you're reaching for a bottle of vanilla, we wouldn't even have that without this enslaved child who took notice of flowers. And I love that story, that there was a gardener who was noticing. And how many other stories, I wanted, the gist of it is, that's one story. How many other stories of enslaved folks who knew things, who were makers and poets, and who didn't have the credit, that kind of thing. And so, I say it with a smile, and I make sure to, one thing I learned about being in the South is they said you catch more flies with honey. But I also believe in telling the truth and, and mentioning, like, hey, this is how we got vanilla. It's not just imitation off a shelf, it is from orchids, and the origins of the orchids that we can grow them now is due to an enslaved 12-year-old boy.
Yeah. Another thing that these books brought up in me were the reality of cycles. You obviously, neither of you just talked about food. As you've mentioned, you talked about it in the context of you all's lives, and both of you in your books at one point were children, and then you were young adults, and then you became spouses and mothers, and I watched you all grow in your prose. And also what was happening around that is the people around you were aging or passing. And so I wanted to ask how your relationship with food has affected your relationship with your mortality.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I know.
These questions. God damn. These are all essay
She's bringing them. She's bringing them, these questions.
My goodness. These are all big book questions. Can I call you when I need to know what I'm going to write next? These are incredible.
But just to add, I just think, like, I'm 35, and you feel invincible in your 20s. Like, I didn't think about my grandmother aging, but then I looked at her, like, when I hit 30, and I was like, you're, like, 80-something. And then I was like, she's going to, like, it hit you at that point. So just as people who are, like, also experiencing this and have written about it, I would just love to know. Maybe this is just personal, like how
No,
you survive this.
It's such a legit, and it's such a beautiful question, and I think the only thing I could say without falling apart and coming into tears here is just the pandemic for sure, but even before that, it just makes you so grateful for every day. I do have a sense, and maybe this is cheesy, every moment. I did it this morning in Jackson. When you wake up and you see where, it's just this, thank you for making me have another day to, whoever is listening. I don't take anything for granted. Even, there's a chapter in here that I wrote about in my 20s, where we were all single. All of us were single. It was just on the cusp of all of us pairing off and things like that. It was having my first taste of miracle fruit. We were going to New York City and having miracle fruit parties. And in case you don't know, it's a little bean. It's a red bean. You you eat it, and everything that you eat afterwards turns sweet for 30 minutes or so. So you can have a piece of miracle fruit, and then you can eat a saltine cracker, and it tastes like a graham cracker. Or you can taste a lemon, and it tastes like an orange. It's crazy. We did that all. It was like 20s. We were all like, nobody to worry about back home or anything like that. That's my family too, and we're still friends. And so it just, writing about food only just brought to light what I already had in practice, which is don't take anybody or anything for granted, even bags of flour. I remember that too, like ordering. I remember getting a text from my friend, Aimee, King Arthur flour is back in stock, or something, and getting that shipped. But even having the ability to have that shipped, I mean, all of that stuff with food and who what it also brings into sharp focus is, bring others to the table when you can. Yeah. And I mean that literally and metaphorically too. Like in your career, in your writing, help bring others, open the door for others the way maybe it wasn't open for you before, And if you see someone struggling, or if you have a hunch someone's struggling, make them some cookies or have them over. Just say, don't worry about bringing anything. This is not a potluck. Just come over. Open. Everybody has abundance in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes even just presence is abundance too. So that's a big answer. It's not food necessarily, but just the pandemic showcased so much hate and so much fear. And we had leaders at the time who were having a PhD in stoking fear, and for Asian Americans in particular, and I'm not speaking for all of Asian Americans, but there were times where Asian Americans were being blamed for the entire pandemic or having dirty foods or things like that. So absolutely, I was writing against that and writing back to that and saying, like, we have so much more in common. Remember when we're around a table?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And I just think to slow down, to bring others to the table, literal and metaphorical, and to push back. Because I think when I go and visit elementary schools, especially like kindergartners, there is no hate. Yeah. It is a learned thing. And I, 30 years of visiting 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, somewhere along the line, it breaks my heart knowing, I almost get choked up thinking about it, where a boy will tell a story about his mom's favorite, spaghetti or something like that, and other male boys will hug him after and high-five him. That doesn't happen when I visit high schools necessarily. Sometimes, but that unabashed joy and hyping them up doesn't happen as often. So what happened to those 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds of all different backgrounds hyping each other up? And I think my book and Crystal's book is just kind of a callback to, it doesn't have to be this way, no matter what our leaders say, Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, I'm closer to thinking about morality, period. But I think writing this book made me think, I was focusing on my kitchen ghost, but it also made me think about what kind of kitchen ghost will I be? And it made me think about how I will show up in my grandchildren's lives and in the community, like expanding that in the community's lives. Like if people want to conjure me as a kitchen ghost, how will I contribute? What have I done on this plane that they'll want to reach back for? And so it made me think about creating those moments like my grandmother did for me, for my grandchildren, for my community, so they'll even think about reaching back.
Yeah. That was my last question. I'm going to open it up to the audience if anybody has. Yes? Candace does.
Candace is ready.
No, I'll repeat it if, you're going to say it, I'm going to repeat it so the whole room hears it, etc. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to repeat for the other side of the room. It's kind of twofold. One, that writers in today's world have to deal with readers having way more access to them than anyone ever has. And if this project was a cathartic release, or what was the other one? Or a door for readers to connect and acknowledge universal truths.
Both. No, I think for me it was both. Like when I wrote it, one of the things I kept, Francis Lamb was my editor, and I kept saying, Francis, is this too? I think this book may be too personal. And he was like, I'm the editor. Let me do my job. You do your job. Yeah, stay in my lane. But I think when I went on book tours, when I realized that what I said earlier, that everyone has a kitchen ghost. This was the most emotional book tour. This was the most cryingest, weepiest, huggingest, and people feel like they know you intimately because they felt something when they read your book. So people would come up to me, which has been wonderful, and cry and hug me, and I'd be like, COVID, 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 because they're remembering their own, and weeping about their own grandmothers or their own great-grandmothers, or either found or lost. Yeah. Like regretting that they didn't have a relationship with that person, or telling me about the recipes and it was very very intimate. Yeah. And so it was quite wonderful in that way, I think, and daunting because I didn't expect it, and I was like, whoa, yeah, hold up now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both, and it's such a great question. Oh my goodness, I think I'm going to call you up too when I need help with figuring out what to write next. I think it's both. I don't want to say it's a curse. I think it's a great blessing in some ways. I mean, you have to, we know how to step back a little bit from social media, or I think it speaks to. I mean, I'm always writing to my beloveds when I'm writing, and so if I'm doing my work, then you feel beloved when you're reading. And that is sometimes a weird area because, I think I was at Lion King with my family a few years ago, and someone came up and was like, Aimee, I love you, and hugged me without asking. And this isn't a dark, crowded, Broadway thing. And it's only because it's just I forget how much people are hungry after so much isolation and so much uncertainty and so much fear and hate mongering. Yeah. I do have some grace, I mean, I don't really necessarily want people hugging me in the dark, but or at least without asking permission first, but I do know in the back of my book I included because actually the number one is a little bit opposite. I had that reaction when I wrote World of Wonders, which was about animals and plants. Everyone has a favorite animal or plant story. With Bite by Bite, it's a little bit different. So they were all weeping over their dead animals or things like that. Bite by Bite, the end of Bite by Bite, the number one thing I got from feedback from my readers and things like that, they wanted to write about food too. But I don't have any experience. I don't have time to take classes. I can't do it. So I included, after being a professor for, this is my 24th year, yeah. I included just prompts that anybody can write, what is your earliest memory with food? I think there's so many just humans who have not been asked, what do you love about food? What are you afraid of about food? And even just kind of a little, ethereal, fanciful things like, I have an exercise called Taste the Rainbow, where I'm just write about your favorite red food, your favorite orange food, your favorite yellow food, green, all the way down to indigo and violet. Yeah. And you don't have to show it to anybody. You don't need to publish. But people are hungry to write their stories about food too. So I find that in connection in that way, people are forgive the pun, hungry to share their own stories, but nobody asks them to, or they're afraid to start. They don't know where to start. And as a teacher, just one of my favorite things is to help people be able to tell their story as well. Yeah. Help them realize and remember that you're all poets as well, makers as well.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions? You guys are running out of here because of LeVar. We know what's going on.
You know what's
You're trying to get a good seat at LeVar.
LeVar's not helping you how to write here, though, folks. LeVar's not, you know.
No, but does anybody have any other questions? Yes.
I have a question, and I'm really nervous, so just bear with me. But,
Absolutely.
I start everything by saying I teach kindergarten, right?
Okay.
And before I was a kindergarten teacher, I was a painter, and my mom encouraged that creativity my entire life.
It's beautiful.
Right? But now I'm training other educators, and my question is, when you spoke about being a maker, that very much resonated with me. I can't remember if I already said that or not, but what would you say to someone who, I live in this space of creativity, it's who I am, it's where I came from, it's so much of my life, even in the classroom, but what do you say to people who don't believe that about themselves, right? Because that's a big part of it.
That's huge. That's 90% of the job is to do that, and it's very simple. That's exactly my people. Like, the people who don't believe in themselves, that is my specialty, actually. And I will just say just one thing is that I tell them to just start small and go back to what you loved as a kid, be that food, be that the garden, be cars, you know, and make it be like, I don't know, the stars. What is it that you loved as a kid? And the things that you were actually excited to go to the library for, if you had a chance to go to the library, or what could you not wait to do when you woke up as a kid? Start small. It may not be the next big novel, but start with that. And that begets a metaphor, and that metaphor begets another metaphor, and before you know, and just keep going. And you don't have to worry about showing it to anybody. But I think overall, people are like, I have to do this big project. I have to do a big novel. I have to do a big book. Start with what you love, and also start with the 5 senses. And I think every kid, what's your favorite smell? What do you fear? What do you love? And it just becomes suddenly the walls come crashing down, because everybody has something that they want to share that they're afraid about, or more likely what they love. And if you just think, for me, for World of Wonders, I was like, I just remember fireflies. I am not an entomologist. I do not know anything really about bugs, but I know fireflies just from having experience with that. So start small, as small as a firefly, as small as a vanilla pod. Start small.
All right. You all, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bravo, Cree. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you.